Steve Palazzolo, Sam Monson from the Check the Mic podcast on the 33rd team with a look at what they see with the Browns when they look at that roster, knowing that quarterback is a challenge.
You look at the rest of this roster, and okay, it's not terrible, but it has been chipped away at relative to where it was in previous years. Like the offensive line, the receiving core, the defense, the secondary, it's all just worse than it used to be.
Yeah, so I did not have the Browns in my bottom five. I struggled with this because let's remember when we're reviewing every game last year and going into the season, we're like, well, the roster's good in Cleveland. Yeah. The quarterback's just the biggest question. And then Deshaun Watson goes out there and you're like, man, he is just dragging down everyone. This offensive line, by the way, like Andrew Berry had built 4, 5, 6 years of a good offensive line in Cleveland. The thing that I don't love about Cleveland is when I look at the offensive line, the 1 year remaining on everybody's contract for Joel Bitonio and Ethan Pocic and Wyatt Teller and Jack Conklin. I still think it's a fine offensive line, but I think the depth has been chipped away from like a long-term perspective for Cleveland because of the Watson money and all the draft capital that they've given up.
Let's welcome in Steve Palazzolo. Steve, you're not only paying monetarily, you're paying draft assets that would be second year, third year guys now.
Yeah, that's the problem. Like when you're doing those exercises, what Sam and I were doing, going through rosters around the league and best and worst rosters. The worst rosters you generally reverse a couple of years and you look at draft picks, and it's not just whether or not they hit, it's volume, and it's volume in the top 50 and the top 75, top 100. And so that's the double whammy of the Watson deal is the money and the poor play. The fact that he did not produce or has not produced, and the counter to that, or the other part of it is you're just not getting first round talents. You're not, and the first round is where you get those high value positions. That's where you get your edge rushers. That's where you get your long term offensive tackles. It is really challenging to build a roster without first round draft picks, without top 50 picks, or when you're just lower in that number than the rest of the league. So I think that's where, up until a couple of years ago, I keep repeating, I think Andrew Berry did a really good job. You looked at what happened with this roster over the course of a couple of years, where they had far more depth than they ever had. The defensive line went from having just Myles Garrett to really being loaded on the edge and at defensive tackle for about a year or two. But that got chipped away at, as I was saying, because you don't have the finances to keep up and you don't have the draft picks to replenish, players as they get a little bit older and a little bit more expensive.
And again, I wasn't against them trading for Deshaun Watson. At the time, you thought you were getting a top 5 quarterback. It didn't work out.
That's it. I mean, look, off-field issues aside, which were a big part of that.
Yep.
But just from a football perspective, you had to look at, okay, from a football perspective, if they were getting the guy that we last saw in Houston, and by the way, the risk was not only the off-field, but also the fact that we hadn't seen him play for quite a while. So you had and he was going to get suspended, and so there was a double whammy of not seeing him for a year and a half, and hoping that he would be the same guy that he was in 2017, 18, and 19. But if you had gotten that player, that offsets some of the offensive line depth, that offsets maybe not having high-end playmakers for them on the outside. It offsets a lot, but instead you got a far worse version of Deshaun Watson on the field than we've ever seen before, and one of the worst versions of any Browns quarterback in recent years, just because it made the offensive line look worse. It like I said, dragged everybody down. So that's it all adds up, man. It all adds up as where the Browns are at this point.